Okay, let's just dive right in. Imagine this number.
Yeah.
Globally, children have lost a staggering 400 million IQ points in the last decade.
Wow.
400 million. It's hard to even really grasp that scale.
It is, yeah. And it's a number that, it absolutely demands our attention. It really suggests something fundamental is changing, something impacting, well, the very foundation of cognitive development for a whole generation.
Absolutely. Welcome everyone to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your sources, the research, the articles, all your notes. We really try to crack them open, understand what's actually going on.
Mm-hmm.
Our mission today is to really deep dive into these complex factors hitting young brains, hitting mental health right now. We're talking food, environmental toxins, and some surprising lifestyle things like technology, even how much kids move.
Yeah, and it's a challenging topic. Some of the connections we'll explore might actually make you rethink things you see every single day. But our goal here is just to unpack it clearly, show you the links that the sources point to, and hopefully, empower you with some understanding.
Exactly. It might feel a bit intense sometimes, but the insights, wow, they're really powerful. So are you ready? Let's unpack this stuff.
Let's do it.
All right. First big piece of the puzzle from the sources. Food. It seems so basic, doesn't it? Can what a child eats really have such a profound power over their brain, their behavior?
Well, the sources are pretty unambiguous here. The answer is a huge yes. The impact of our modern diet and sugar in particular on developing brains and bodies, it's described as massive and really, really scary.
Massive and scary. Okay, that definitely grabs you. How does sugar actually do that?
Well, it starts kind of subtly. Processed foods, high sugar, they fundamentally change children's taste preferences. Just think about it for a sec. Natural foods, like fruits, right? Our ancestors thought they were wonderfully sweet, but they taste less appealing to a kid whose palate is just constantly hit with the intense sweetness of processed snacks. It literally rewires their taste buds, sets them up for life, preferring these unhealthy manufactured flavors.
And that preference, I imagine, leads straight to major health issues.
Precisely. This early exposure, it dramatically increases the risk for obesity and type 2 diabetes conditions that, were basically unheard of in kids just a few decades back.
Yeah, it's shocking.
And these aren't just weight issues. They lead to chronic inflammation, lower energy, more sickness, and potentially they can shave years off their lives and really reduce the quality.
And it's not just physical, is it? There's a direct brain chemistry thing going on. The sources really emphasize that sugar-dopamine link.
Oh, yeah, this is where the behavioral piece really clicks in. Eating sweet foods gives this quick, intense rush of dopamine, the happy chemical or reward signal in the brain.
Like quick hit.
Yeah, but the problem is constantly getting these easy dopamine fixes from hyper-palatable junk food. It can desensitize the brain's reward pathways. It just raises the bar. So then normal, healthy activities that should feel naturally rewarding, like playing outside or learning something new, connecting with people, they just don't give the same powerful chemical hit compared to the quick fix from candy or even, scrolling on a phone.
Quick fix problem. And kids are just bombarded with messages pushing these fixes. The sources mention stats from the American Psychiatric Association and something like, 75% of commercials aimed at children are for unhealthy foods?
That's right, 75%. And if you look at all the commercials shown during kids' TV time, half of them are food ads.
Half?
Yeah. So put those together, 50% of ads are food and 3/4 of those are junk. It's just relentless. It's why, using cartoon characters to sell cigarettes was banned eventually.
Yeah.
We get that children's brains are incredibly pliable, easily influenced by ads. The same idea applies so strongly here.
It really feels like a setup. And the sources even mention some history here. Efforts to suppress this kind of information go way back.
Do. The material mentions Dr. Ben Feingold back in the 60s, linking food additives and sugar to behavioral issues and facing serious pushback. Then there's a story from the 70s. Someone was on a media tour talking about how high sugar diets harm kids' behavior. Apparently, they were pulled from national TV in Australia.
No way.
Yeah, allegedly at the request of the American Sugar Institute, who are sponsoring their own experts tour, saying sugar was fine. It just highlights how long this information's been around and the powerful forces resisting it.
That's pretty wild when you think about it. And it connects to that food addict idea the sources talk about. Adults hooked on processed food.
Yeah.
They often normalize giving that same stuff to their kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
They celebrate with it, use it as rewards, bring it to every party, even when they kind of know it's not really healthy.
Yeah, the analogy used in the sources it's powerful, comparing it to parents giving kids cigarettes just because they smoke themselves. When something's normalized around you and you're dealing with sugar's effect on your own brain's reward system, it makes it incredibly hard to break that cycle and protect your kids from the long-term harm.
Okay, so it's not just the problem of too much bad food, but also not enough good food. The sources are really clear. Nutrient deficiencies are a massive factor for mental well-being.
Absolutely. It's a really stark paradox. Many obese children are simultaneously overfed calorie-wise, but tragically undernourished in terms of essential vitamins, minerals, healthy fats. They're eating empty calories that just don't give the brain and body what they actually need to function well.
So what are some of the key nutrients the sources say kids are often low on?
Well, the list includes vitamin D, zinc, magnesium, folate, iron, and omega-3s. Quite a few critical ones.
And why are these specific ones so important for the brain, for behavior?
Okay, let's take a few. Magnesium, for instance, often called a calming mineral, right? Low levels are strongly linked to anxiety. Zinc is involved in hundreds of enzyme reactions, loads of them crucial for brain function, deficiency, tied to ADHD, anxiety, depression. Iron is vital. It's needed to carry oxygen in the blood to every cell, including brain cells. Low iron can cause impaired cognition, like actual brain fog, even in kids. Anemia, too, and it's linked to ADHD.
Brain fog in kids, that's a heavy thought.
It is. Then you've got B vitamins, vitamin D, vitamin E, also crucial for overall brain health, reducing inflammation. And omega-3s, especially DHA, you find that in avocados, nuts, seeds, olive oil. They're absolute building blocks for brain development, cognitive function, low levels, strongly linked to ADHD and spectrum disorders.
Something as simple as swapping out a sugary snack for, say, a handful of nuts and seeds.
Yeah.
It's not just avoiding junk. It's directly feeding the brain what it needs to focus, stay calm, develop properly.
Exactly. And this takes us right back to processed foods. They often use synthetic vitamins, which aren't always absorbed as well, and they're stripped of natural phytonutrients in that absolutely critical element. Fiber?
Fiber. And fiber brings us straight to the gut-brain connection. The sources say this is paramount and that a lot of children's guts are, messed up.
They are. And the gut-brain axis, it's like a two-way superhighway. Fiber is the main food for our good gut bacteria, our microbiome.
Gut bugs.
The gut bugs, yeah. When they're healthy and well-fed, they produce these vital short-chain fatty acids. These heal the gut lining, and they even create precursors for neurotransmitters like serotonin and norepinephrine, some of our key happy hormones, mood regulators.
So a diet lacking fiber literally starves the good gut bugs, which means less of these mood chemicals get made.
Precisely. Lack of fiber leads to an unhealthy, imbalanced microbiome. And that imbalance is directly linked in the research to symptoms of ADHD, anxiety, and depression.
Wow. Okay. And this whole picture, it seems to connect back to obesity and inflammation too.
It absolutely does. The sources highlight a really strong kind of disturbing link between childhood obesity and mental health challenges, anxiety, depression, and ADHD. Obesity isn't just extra weight, it's a state of chronic, low-grade inflammation all through the body.
And that inflammation can actually cross into the brain.
Yes. The inflammatory signals released by excess fat tissue, they can cross the protective blood-brain barrier. And this causes inflammation in the brain.
Right.
And brain inflammation doesn't always show up like, obvious swelling. In kids, it often manifests as symptoms we recognize. Depression, anxiety, ADHD, behavioral changes.
So an obese child isn't just dealing with physical weight. Their brain might actually be operating in this state of constant inflammatory stress.
In many cases, yes. And like we said, obese children often have a leaky gut, a dysfunctional microbiome. This means their bodies are impaired in making those essential neurotransmitters, GABA, needed for calm and repair, BDNF, crucial for brain growth, repair, and serotonin and dopamine, key for mood, motivation, focus.
This must be why that anecdote about the juvenile detention center hit so hard. Just by changing the food, getting rid of junk, adding healthy stuff, they saw a 97% drop in violence.
97%. And a 75% reduction in using restraints and a 100% drop in suicide rates.
That wasn't meds or therapy, that was food.
It's undeniable evidence, really. Shows the profound immediate impact diet has on behavior, mood, impulse control. It completely validates these growing fields like metabolic psychiatry, nutritional psychiatry. They recognize you just can't separate brain health from overall physical health, and it starts with what you eat.
Okay. Food is foundational, clearly. And the modern diet is working against kids. Now let's shift to the next big factor. The sources call silent threats toxins. How much do we really know about the environmental toxins just surrounding us every day?
Probably far less than we should, and certainly less than we need to. The sources make it really clear our environment is becoming more toxic and kids are exposed constantly from countless sources.
What kind of sources are we talking about here?
I mean, they're literally everywhere. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, personal care products like lotions, shampoos, conditioners.
Right.
Cleaning supplies, even our homes. Modern homes are built much tighter now for energy efficiency, right?
Yeah.
But that unfortunately traps indoor air pollutants. VOCs from building materials, furniture, and mold if there's any moisture issue at all. Then there's vintage toys, old paint dust from renovations, treated playground wood, even dental fillings are mentioned as potential sources.
Wow. That statistic about water was pretty jarring too. 170 million Americans drinking radioactive water.
Yeah, that came from a Yahoo article cited in the sources. And resources like the Environmental Working Group, OJDG.org, they back up concerns about contaminants like arsenic, other chemicals in water supplies all over the country. And beyond those specific chemicals like parabens, they can act like estrogens in the body. VOCs and mycotoxins from mold are really significant issues.
And these aren't just mild irritants. They're actively harming young, developing brains.
They absolutely are. Children's bodies are smaller, right? Still developing. And their natural detox pathways, they're just less efficient than our adults. They simply get overwhelmed by the daily load.
Let's talk about mold toxicity specifically. The sources seem to go into some detail there.
Yeah, mold and the mycotoxins it produces, they can really wreak havoc. They can damage the mitochondria. Think of those as the little power generators in your cells.
Okay.
This can trigger something called a cell danger response. Basically, the body goes into this constant state of fight or flight, just trying to survive what it sees as a threat. Mold toxicity can also hyperactivate the immune system, sometimes leading to autoimmunity. That's where the body gets confused, starts attacking its own tissues, which is a suspected trigger for conditions like PANS-BANDAS, where the immune system attacks parts of the brain.
You actually have a personal experience with mold, don't you?
I do, yeah. When I was 13, we moved into a house with significant toxic black mold. I developed really severe symptoms. My tonsils swelled up dramatically, sleep apnea, chronic fatigue, intense brain fog. My body just went into this extreme reaction mode. It was really clear something environmental was fundamentally derailing my health.
Personal connection. It makes it feel very real. Now, what about heavy metals? The sources call them big root causes for brain function issues like ADHD.
Yeah, they are extremely significant environmental culprits. The sources name mercury, lead, aluminum, antimony, manganese, and arsenic as key players to watch out for.
And we started with that shocking lead statistic.
Right.
400 million IQ points lost globally. Let's just revisit that quickly.
It's absolutely worth repeating because the impact is just so vast. Lead exposure, it comes from sources like old water pipes, dust from renovating older homes, maybe even your neighbor's renovation dust drifting over, vintage toys, books painted with lead paint, some apple juice, treated playground wood.
And how does lead actually damage the brain?
Okay, so lead interferes with the production of something called heme. Heme is a crucial part of red blood cells. It's like the tiny vehicle carrying oxygen all through your body, including to your brain.
Right.
So reduced oxygen flow means impaired brain function, cognitive difficulties, that brain fog we talked about, anemia, and it's strongly linked to ADHD behaviors. The sort of relative good news here is that lead exposure can be tested for with a simple blood test.
Okay. What about mercury? Where are kids picking that up?
Common sources include certain types of fish that are high in mercury. And maybe most surprisingly for many people, silver dental fillings. They're about 50% mercury.
Got 2%.
Yeah, small amounts of mercury vapor can actually be released by heat from hot drinks, or even just brushing your teeth and then you inhale it. The sources mention studies, like one on sheep, showing mercury depositing in organs, including the brain, within like a month of getting fillings.
Look.
And compounding this, babies are often born with a significant burden of toxins already, including mercury, passed from the mother during pregnancy.
So a mother's dental fillings could potentially pass mercury to her developing baby.
That's what the research strongly suggests, yeah. Once it's in the body, mercury tends to build up in the brain and fatty tissues. And there, it can interfere with making neurotransmitters, even melatonin, which disrupts sleep and mood.
Aluminum is another one that just seems hard to avoid.
Yes, it's surprisingly everywhere. Found in some vaccines, used as an anti-caking agent in lots of processed foods like salt, sugar, flour, in deodorants, other personal care products. The concern is that it can kill brain cells and interfere with nerve communication.
And arsenic. I always associate that with contaminated water, but the sources mentioned chicken and rice.
Correct. Arsenic is actually used in conventional chicken feed. Apparently it makes the birds grow faster and can make the meat look pinker even though it's a toxin.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. And it also tends to accumulate in rice, especially brown rice, and rice grown in areas with high arsenic in the soil or water, like parts of China and India. Apple juice can also contain arsenic residues from pesticides. So, choosing organic can help reduce exposure from food, and checking your water quality with resources like eeg.org is really important.
And it sounds like all these toxins, these heavy metals, they don't just affect the brain directly, they also damage that gut microbiome we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. They create another layer of dysfunction, impacting that delicate balance of bacteria in the gut. And to make it even more complex, some children have genetic variations like in enzymes, one called MTHFR is mentioned, that make their body's natural detox systems work less efficiently.
Like having a slower filter.
Exactly, like having a slower filter, so they're even more vulnerable to toxin buildup.
Wow. So it's not always one massive exposure, but maybe this constant low-level assault that some kids are just less equipped to handle because of genetics or other factors.
Exactly. It's often the cumulative burden that tips the scale.
And what about these underlying, sometimes hidden infections, even parasites? How little does it actually take for one of these silent issues to throw a child's whole system off track?
Surprisingly little, it seems. The sources point to things like Lyme disease and its co-infections like Babesia, which is specifically linked to irritability and anger, or even chronic strep infections. These can stack up, keep the immune system stressed out, generate chronic inflammation, and, like we discussed with mold, can sometimes trigger autoimmunity. In conditions like panspandas, this autoimmune reaction can target areas of the brain, like the basal ganglia, leading to sudden, really dramatic neuropsychiatric symptoms.
Like what?
Things like percatics, obsessive-compulsive behaviors, intense anxiety, sudden fears, sensory sensitivities. It can be really dramatic and sudden.
That must be absolutely terrifying for the child and the family. And then, parasites. The sources call them a most unknown common trigger and say they're often completely written off.
They are incredibly common globally. The World Health Organization estimates billions are affected, but they're often overlooked in wealthier nations or dismissed unless there's like a clear travel history. But the sources explain they're ubiquitous, found in soil, on raw fruit and veg, if not washed properly, in undercooked meat, ponds. We can get them from pets.
And how do parasites affect the body and even the brain in these hidden ways?
Well, parasites are remarkably good survivors. They often don't want to make you critically ill because, they rely on you as their host.
Yeah.
Instead, they can subtly hijack your system. There's that really striking example of the toxoplasmosis parasite.
Right.
In mice, it manipulates their brains to make them less afraid of cats, even attracted to cat urine. It basically guides the mouse towards being eaten so the parasite can reach its preferred host, the cat. It just shows how parasites can actually alter behavior.
So is it possible that seemingly unexplained irritability or anxiety or other behavioral issues could potentially have a parasitic root?
That's a really provocative thought. It is. Potential symptoms mentioned include things like an itchy rear end, unexplained skin issues, chronic digestive problems like IBS, bloating, alternating constipation and diarrhea, grinding teeth, insomnia, feeling worse around the full moon, and yes, irritability.
But testing is difficult, you said.
Yeah, standard stool samples are notoriously poor at detecting many parasites. Practitioners often have to rely heavily on detailed symptom questionnaires to decide whether to treat empirically, just based on the symptoms.
And there's even a theory mentioned that the body might sometimes bring in parasites.
Yeah, one theory discussed is that the body might use certain parasites as a way to mop up other toxins, like heavy metals or mold. But in our toxic world, the parasites themselves can get stuck or cause their own problems. It just underscores how complex these root causes can be and why you have to look beyond just the surface symptoms.
Which brings us back to that incredibly dramatic story you shared earlier about the 12-year-old girl.
It's such a powerful example of why investigating root causes is just so critical. This was a girl, previously healthy, who, over a single weekend, became completely catatonic.
Just like that.
Just like that. Admitted to the hospital, diagnosed with a psychiatric condition, discharged on powerful psychiatric medications. But an acute, sudden onset like that in a healthy kid, it just screams something else is going on here.
Right.
So we investigated further and found she had an active mycoplasma pneumonia infection, often called walking pneumonia.
Walking pneumonia could cause her to become catatonic.
In her specific case, it appears that was the trigger. It overwhelmed her system, led to that extreme presentation. The hospital had only tested for strep. Once the mycoplasma was identified and treated with a common antibiotic, she began to emerge from the catatonic state within a week.
Wow. Just a week.
Yeah. Now, it took 13 weeks to safely wean her off the Ativan she'd been put on, but only a week of treating the actual infection to bring her back to consciousness, back to being responsive.
That story, it's just a testament to the importance of really digging deep.
It completely changed her life, her family's life trajectory. Absolutely.
Okay, so we've covered food, we've covered environmental toxins, hidden infections. The last major area in the sources is lifestyle and environment. Things like technology, stress, and crucially, how much kids move and interact with nature. How are our modern lives impacting kids through these factors?
Hugely. The sources really highlight digital overload and screen time as major drivers of anxiety and depression in young people.
How does that play out exactly?
Well, constant screen time, especially social media and news, can profoundly distort a child's worldview, their sense of reality. News often sensationalizes, focuses on stress and chaos. It keeps the viewer in this state of heightened anxiety. Mm-hmm. And social media, it's a carefully curated highlight reel, isn't it? Presenting these filtered, unrealistic versions of lives that kids compare themselves to.
Yeah, there's a detail about the news industry itself that really stuck out from the sources.
Yes. The material notes that pharmaceutical companies are major sponsors of news media. The implication, as it's presented in the sources, is that this creates an incentive for news to be stressful.
Why?
Because stress is a major contributor to physical and mental health issues, which in turn creates a market for pharmaceuticals. It's presented as a potentially troubling cycle.
So news could be incentivized to keep us stressed, making us more likely to get unwell and potentially need medication. That's a tough perspective.
It's a perspective presented in the sources as a factor in the stressful environment kids are growing up in. And this constant exposure to stress, combined with the unrealistic comparisons on social media, it's particularly damaging for young girls. Seeing these distorted beauty standards on platforms like Instagram, it's strongly linked to rising anxiety, depression, and tragically suicide rates among teen girls. It's a powerful distortion of reality, as the sources put it.
And beyond the mental, the emotional toll, screens keep kids sedentary and disrupt crucial sleep patterns.
Exactly. The sources really emphasize that teens and younger kids are just not ready for the level of social media exposure, that validation culture they face. Reducing screen time consistently shows improvements in mental health, even school performance. Those examples of schools in Europe seeing positive changes just by getting kids off their phones during the day, they're really compelling.
Which leads right into stress in general.
Yeah, high stress puts anyone's brain into fight or flight mode. For a child trying to learn, that's devastating. Fight or flight literally shuts down the parts of the brain needed for higher level thinking, memory, recall all the things you need for classroom learning. And modern kids are navigating just an unprecedented level of information overload and environmental stressors.
And they're moving less. Much less than previous generations. The sources point out kids have largely moved indoors.
It's a dramatic cultural shift, and there's a truly striking comparison in the sources. Sitting is presented as being potentially worse than smoking.
Worse than smoking. Okay, that's a definite hook. How can sitting possibly be worse than smoking?
Because sitting significantly reduces oxygen flow to the brain. The sources cite a figure around 10% less oxygen. The brain is the most energy-hungry organ we have, needs massive amounts of oxygen. When that supply is reduced by prolonged sitting, the brain starts conserving resources.
Okay.
The frontal lobes, critical for executive function, attention, impulse control, exactly what's needed for learning in class, can essentially start to shut down. This contributes directly to inattention, difficulty focusing, behaviors we associate with ADHD and learning problems. And think about it. Smokers usually stand up to smoke, right? They get at least a little movement. Prolonged sitting is uniquely bad for brain oxygenation.
That image is stark. So sitting isn't just passive, it's actively hindering a child's ability to learn and regulate themselves.
It really is. And movement is crucial for another reason. Our muscles are like chemical factories.
Yeah.
When we move, our muscles produce BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
BNF.
BDNF is like fertilizer for the brain. It's absolutely essential for the growth, the maintenance of neurons, and for creating those happy, smart, and active neurotransmitters we rely on for mood, focus, cognitive function.
So movement isn't just about physical fitness. It's essential for the brain to even make the right chemicals to function well.
Exactly. And this lack of movement is often coupled with what's sometimes called nature deficit disorder. Kids spend far less time outdoors than they used to. Nature is incredibly restorative, accessible, often free. Even simple exposure, like 10 minutes of natural light first thing in the morning, can profoundly improve circadian rhythm, hormone balance, stress responses.
And it's not just about formal exercise, right?
Yeah.
It's about natural, playful movement.
Precisely. Kids are biologically wired to move, play, climb, balance to engage in healthy risk-taking. This isn't just burning energy, it's vital for their psychological development, for building confidence, understanding their physical capabilities, learning their relationship with the world around them. Not getting this crucial developmental input deeply impacts their mental and emotional health. That anecdote about the homeschool family putting trampolines and climbing boards in their house, that's not just about fitness, it's about supporting a child's fundamental need for natural movement all day long.
So when we pull all these threads together, the processed food, nutrient deficiencies, damaged gut, environmental toxins, heavy metals, hidden infections, digital overload, chronic stress, lack of movement, what's the overriding picture the sources paint here?
Well, the common thread seems to be that these factors are collectively creating just an overwhelming burden on children's developing bodies and brains. They lead to this state of chronic toxicity, inflammation, dysregulated stress responses, and this state directly impacts their mental health, their cognitive function, their ability to really thrive.
And while that might sound incredibly daunting, maybe even scary, the sources also frame it as empowering, don't they?
It is, absolutely, because understanding the root threats allows us to identify them and, crucially, make informed choices to avoid them or address them. It shifts the focus from just managing symptoms to actually addressing the underlying causes.
That perspective definitely changes things. So what does all of this mean for us, for families, for society? Is there a final provocative thought from the sources, or maybe from our discussion, to leave with you, our listener?
Perhaps it's this. Children are incredibly sensitive indicators of the health of their environment, of society. Their escalating struggles with mental health, with development, they aren't happening in a vacuum. They are, in many ways, mirrors reflecting the systemic issues we have with our food systems, chemical exposures, modern lifestyles. So addressing these root causes in kids isn't just about improving individual lives. It may be absolutely essential for the future health, the resilience of society as a whole.
That's a powerful way to frame it. Makes the scale feel immense, but also the potential for positive change feels really significant. And for listeners who want to dive deeper, find practical ways to address these issues, the food, the toxins, these underlying factors. The sources did mention some specific resources.
Yes, Zonia was highlighted as a platform offering expert-led content on these very topics. They feature shows like Reinventing Detoxification, which provides a blueprint for reducing toxic burden, and a 7-part docuseries called Toxin Free that delves deep into sources of exposure and detox methods.
Okay, so if you're feeling maybe a bit overwhelmed and looking for guidance on a proactive approach to health for your family, Zonia sounds like it could be a valuable resource. The sources mentioned it costs less than 50 cents a day, includes a 7-day risk-free trial, plus you get access to the full Young and Thriving docuseries that much of this information came from. You can check out Zonia for more information and expert guidance.
And we would genuinely love to hear your thoughts. What parts of this deep dive really stood out to you the most? Please share your perspective in the comments section below.
Yet your feedback is truly valuable as we explore these complex topics together. And looking ahead, our next deep dive is going to build directly on this foundation. We'll be focusing specifically on brain function itself, exploring the different stages of development in childhood, adolescence, the unique threats and opportunities at each stage, and practical testing tools available to understand what's really going on inside.
Promises to be another essential exploration for sure.
We'll see you there.